Hey guys, Mike Biggie Rhodes here. Got a little bit of time here at my Taekwondo school before my classes start. Just thought I'd give you my breakdown and picks on the UFC on Fox Boston card coming up on Sunday. Let's start with the main event. We have a long-awaited matchup between TJ Dillashaw and Dominic Cruz. I think this is going to be a very interesting fight. I think that TJ is going to be the winner. I think that the styles being very similar will play in his favor because I think he's the harder hitter. I think he'll be able to avoid the minor takedowns that Dominic normally gets, but doesn't really control the positions. I think TJ will be able to escape a lot of those and land damaging shots, in which Dominic is not very used to being hit, that many times with his movement and his evasiveness. I'm just gonna have to take TJ in that one. I just think he's better right now, and he's moving into his prime as I see Dom with the injuries maybe past his prime. In the co-main event, you got my teammate Anthony Pettis versus Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez is tough. He's one of the guys who in the 55 division was outside of the UFC for so long that a lot of fans didn't get to know him until he came over to the UFC, which, he had a setback, but then, he got back on track. So he's tough, but Anthony Pettis is my teammate, and he's good. He was just a champion. He's just one of the best in the world. I believe on any given night, he is the best in the world when he's fully focused. I got a chance to watch him through this entire camp, and he did everything the right way, man. He didn't cut any corners on his diet, his training. He's had good wrestling. Just sometimes in fights, people are able to set up their takedowns really well. Anthony assured that up with Izzy Martinez, with the Izzy style wrestling, and I believe that's going to be a factor, stuffing the takedowns and fighting from his range. His kicks and punches, Eddie takes a beating, and Anthony's lethal. So when Anthony puts a kick on your face or punches you in the chin, these guys fall down. And he also has a submission game, I think, that can submit Eddie if he hurts him. We have Travis Brown versus Matt Mitrione. That's kind of a toss-up. I think they both are, they're heavyweights. Big, aggressive guys who throw big punches, power, and, they've both been hurt in fights and come back. Everybody knows I dislike Meathead. Had some run-ins in the past, but I'm going to have to take Travis Brown in this fight just because I think he's the more dangerous of the strikers. That's if he can, keep Matt from on top of him with wrestling, and, Matt being a former football player, he'll get that tackle, and he's just a really aggressive guy. So I'm taking Travis in that fight. Then we have Ross Pearson versus Francisco Trinaldo. Ross Pearson is one of my favorite fighters, man. I've been a fan of his ever since The Ultimate Fighter. When I fought for the UFC in New Zealand, I got to sit down and talk to Ross for a little bit. He's just a good guy, man. Top bloke, as they say if you're from where he is. I just think his boxing is going to be a little bit too much. Francisco has power, so does Ross. So it could be a race of who gets there quicker. I think Trinaldo will start to gas a little bit, going for takedowns. Ross has a traditionally good wrestling defense, and with Alliance has been upping his offensive wrestling game as well. Finishing up the prelim card, the main event of the prelim card, we have Ben Saunders versus Patrick Cote. I see Ben Saunders winning that fight. Just more the diverse guy in the fight. Better on the feet with the striking. His Muay Thai and clinching is really, really awesome. And in his second stint in the UFC, he's found a resurgence, and he's looking really good. His jiu-jitsu, I don't always agree with the 10th Planet as far as MMA, but Ben Saunders is a beast with the 10th Planet jiu-jitsu in MMA, and he's really good at it. So nothing to take away from you 10th Planet guys out there, but he's really effective with it. Next we have, I don't know how to say his name, Mehdi Baghdad Bahagdad, butchering that name, versus Chris Wade. I have seen that kid fight for the RFA, and he's tough, really good striker, but Chris Wade is a grinder at a fast pace. I think he's out there in New York with Bermudez and those guys like that, so he fights that aggressive style, really good wrestler, grappler, good boxing, mixes it up well. I'm going to have to take him with the other guy stepping up on short notice. Tim Bosch versus Ed Herman. I think that was late added to the card, and I believe it's at 205, which I think favors Ed Herman. He's the bigger guy. Traditionally likes to weigh on his opponents and wear them down. Tim Bosch is big too, but I think that Ed Herman's grappling and clinching will tire Tim out and ultimately lead to a very unexciting unanimous decision for Ed Herman. Then we have Maximo Blanco versus Luke Sanders. Maximo Blanco is a fighter who's been in the UFC and other organizations. He's a veteran. Not always the cleanest of fighters. If you watch a lot of his fights, he gets points deducted and, illegal knees and stuff like that. He tends to let his emotions get the best of him, and sometimes that causes him to create or, penalize himself in fights. Luke Sanders is a friend of mine, fought for the RFA title, was the RFA title holder at bantamweight. He is moving up to 45, but he is not a small guy as far as stature. Not very tall, but muscular build and really athletic. I'm going to take Luke on that one. Cool hands, Luke, taking him. The prelims on UFC Fight Pass, a war, Darren Cruikshank versus Paul Felder. I've trained with Cruikshank before. He came up to Rufus Sport before the UFC in Milwaukee. Did some training with us. He has a really good style. He's fought my teammate Eric Koch. He defeated him. I think Paul Felder is just going to be too much for Darren Cruikshank. Paul Felder is a guy who pressures. He likes to come forward, and his striking is brutal. Darren Cruikshank is really good with the feet and legs, but I think that Paul Felder will close the distance, which doesn't allow you to get off a lot of your kicks. And I think that will be the determining factor in that fight, and Paul Felder's power with the boxing and spinning attacks. But it could be very interesting. They both spin. I'm looking very much forward to that fight. I think it's, taekwondo, karate backgrounds going at it, so it should be an interesting fight with some pretty cool tricks and kicks thrown in that fight. Then we got Latifi versus O'Connell. O'Connell, the king of the weigh-in, rock, paper, scissors, touching people's noses and stuff like that. I believe Latifi's just going to be too much for him. The wrestling and the boxing of Latifi, if he doesn't gas, he should be able to control and get after Sean O'Connell a little bit. So I'm picking him for the TKO finish. Jim Hedges versus Charles Rosa. I think that was replaced. Jim Hedges was with the injury. And then the guy who replaced him got injured as well. So I'm not even sure who's fighting Charles Rosa. So I'm just going to, that's kind of a toss-up. Charles Rosa is pretty good. Remember, he came in on short notice and fought, I think, Dennis Seaver and did very well. So I'm just going to leave that one up for grabs. You guys can pick that one. Rob Font versus Joey Gomez. I am not familiar with Joey Gomez, but Rob Font is a Sitmatong fighter, and I know his striking is really good, and he's got some good Muay Thai and stand-up skills. So I'm going to take him in that fight. And we have Franciscamar Barroso, butchered that name as well, I'm sure, versus Elvis Matucic. Elvis is from, I think, Bosnia or Croatia, but he resided in Iowa, where I'm from. So I'm very familiar with him as a fighter, former MFC champion, World Series of Fighting Fighter, and then was recently with the VFC about to headline their event that's airing on UFC Fight Pass. Elvis is going up to 205, but do not let that confuse you. Elvis is a really big middleweight, and so 205 will not be a problem. Like I said, I'm not very familiar with this opponent, so he may be big as well. But what I do know is Elvis is very, very powerful. Good wrestling, good boxing, throw really hard, low kicks. So if he was training like he should have been, preparing for this fight coming up, and this wasn't on too short of notice, I'm going to go with the Iowa native here, Elvis, for the victory. And I'll give him the decision. If he's in great shape, I'm taking him for the finish. That's my predictions and breakdown of some of the fights on UFC on Fox Boston card. Hit me up in my comments section. Leave me some tweets. Let me know what you guys think and who you're picking. And first of many, I'm going to start breaking down some fights, just giving my insights, my thought and opinion about stuff. And, don't be afraid to, call me out, question me. I look forward to it, conversation, and don't bet too much money off my picks because I don't want to hear you if you blame me. Mike Biggie Rhodes, I'm out.